Welcome, 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 Organic Chemistry. I am so excited. Let's kick off our summer semester with a fun video. So this one is for fun. This one, I want to just define organic chemistry. I want to give you some perspective on why we even give a crap about organic chemistry. Is it just one of those prereqs that you have to work your way through and just survive this semester? Or why in the world do we even care about studying organic chemistry? Is it there just to torture us and make us jump through hoops before we can get into our program? Or is there actually some pretty fun, pretty cool stuff to organic chemistry? So I am excited to start this semester, and I'm excited to share some organic chemistry with you. This is our first video for 23-23. I'm super excited. All right, so let's just start by defining organic chemistry. Wait for it. This is going to be super complicated. Are you ready? Carbon containing. I love it. I love it. Organic chemistry sometimes gets a bad rap for being kind of a hard subject, and yet our definition and our first thing we look at is actually really straightforward. Organic chemistry itself is simply carbon containing. So we're going to center everything around our substances with carbon. Isn't that awesome? So everything we're going to look at this semester, except maybe some of our inorganic reagents, will center around carbon. And in fact, we're going to start our semester with our most basic form of carbon. And we're going to start that literally looking at carbon and hydrogen. Our entire first unit will be carbon and hydrogen, and that's it. And bonding those together. So it's pretty exciting. There's actually a rich history for organic chemistry, and throughout the summer we've got just a couple of videos that are going to talk about some of that history. And today I want to talk just a little bit of history and some stories about organic chemistry so we can get perspective on why we even need to take this class. So everything we're dealing with is going to be carbon containing. And our first actual official video for carbon and hydrogen will start with our bonding now that you guys have taken your pretest. But I want to just start by defining some of the other terms that we're going to get. In fact, I want to take a second to go all the way back to Gen Chem 1. And let's do some defining. So we learned that we have our atoms. And let's draw just a very general Bohr atom like we used to look at in Gen Chem. And we learned that our nucleus has protons and neutrons, and that somewhere out here we have electrons. Now, this is awesome. What a great place to start in our Gen Chem, right? Our number of protons, this one was essential. That number of protons is where we started everything. That is how we identify all of our elements. So literally what makes carbon carbon is the number of protons in the nucleus. So if you want to grab a periodic table and take a look at it, and again, we'll do some more reviewing in our next video. Today's video is kind of fun. But if you want to pick up and just take a look at a periodic table, you'll find that carbon has how many protons in the nucleus? 6. Okay. We've got 6 protons. And then if we're talking about isotopes, we've heard that term, that all has to deal with neutrons. We won't talk about too many isotopes this semester, but they'll come up occasionally. And then here's another biggie. So the first one was, how do you identify an element? It's the number of protons. Here's another huge definition. What gives that element its properties is actually the electrons. So when we start talking about properties, we're going to start talking about electrons. In fact, the outermost electron, those outermost or those valence electrons, that is where the properties of that element come from. So if you're looking at something like sodium, why does it light on fire when it touches water? Because of that outside electron. That outermost electron is really responsible for the fact that it's shiny, looks like a metal, but it kind of acts like clay, and it is quite flammable when it touches water. All of those properties actually come from those outermost electrons. Okay, so we'll keep that in mind. And then as we got a little bit bigger in our defining through our Gen Chem, okay, we noticed that also those outermost electrons were the ones that did all of our bonding. So we kind of worked our way from our atoms into our bonds. And then if we take a couple atoms and we bond them together and we start making molecules and compounds, let's look at something like, I'm just going to pick something like HCl. Okay, well now what makes that compound, let's get a little bit bigger, another definition, is which atoms are bonded to which atoms. So when you first start Gen Chem 1, that can be quite obvious, okay, which atoms are, let's write that a little bit better, are bonded to which atoms. This is a really good place to start in organic chemistry because we can start to get a little bit more complicated. We can look at something like, let's look at booze. Okay, what makes this molecule booze is the fact that you've got two carbons bonded to each other, bonded to this oxygen, and all these hydrogens bonded around it. This is literally what makes this compound booze, is which atoms are bonded to which atoms. Okay, it's not the formula. That is part of it. That's part that helps, but it's literally which atoms are bonded to which atoms. And I'm going to add to that. So this is number 1. This is exactly where we're going to start our unit. We're going to start bonding, and we're going to look at which atoms are attached to which atoms. And then number 2, in what shape? Now you started this in Gen Chem 1 and we're going to build on it this semester. We've got 2 things to consider. So what makes this compound booze is the fact that you've got all of these atoms attached to each other in exactly this way and their shape. So we are going to consider all kinds of things in 3D this semester. We're going to draw in 3D. We're going to picture things in 3D. And we're going to really mess with something called an isomer. So let's just draw our formula for booze. We've got 2 carbons, 6 hydrogens, and an oxygen. We can have another compound that is completely different but has that exact same formula. Check this out. You probably did this in Gen Chem 1 as well. Now this is no longer booze. This is an ether, as in anesthesia ethers or good solvent ethers. These are completely different compounds, yet they have the same formula. These are called isomers. We will spend a lot of time this semester looking at isomers. But I want you to really just sink in on the definitions and why we even give a crap about any of this. So what makes hydrogen hydrogen is its number of protons. What makes hydrogen bond in the way that it bonds are that outside electron. What makes this whole compound booze is which atoms are bonded to which atoms and in what shape. It's not just the formula. It's not a name. It's nothing like that. It's literally which atoms are bonded to which atoms. And here's where it gets even sassier. So in the last 20 years in the news, we get an awful lot of terms thrown at us. Things like organic are thrown out there all the time for farming practices, for our vegetables. You go to Whole Foods and you're buying organic versus not organic. Just keep in mind in chemistry, what we're dealing with is carbon containing. It is that simple. It's not about practices in farming. It is not about where the compound came from. All right, both of these compounds, what makes them different isn't where they came from. It's physically what's bonded to what. And so I want to throw out some more terms that we're going to hear all semester that relate to that, some really important terms. One of them is natural. Okay, you can see that term everywhere, 6 ways to Sunday, and immediately your brain jumps to, oh, if it's natural, it must be better. In this class for chemistry, natural simply means found in nature. Now, is booze found in nature? Yeah, it is. The booze you're drinking, did it come from nature? Maybe or maybe not. Is it the same thing? Yes, because the atoms that are attached to those, the way those atoms are attached are the same. It doesn't matter where it came from. So that's going to be really important this semester. We will refer to an awful lot of natural products, and these are all things that are found in nature. It doesn't mean they're good for you. Strychnine is a natural product. It's also an excellent rat poison. Some of the most toxic substances known are actually found in nature. So it doesn't mean that it's good for you. It just means it's found in nature. Okay, and in fact, here's one of the reasons why we give a crap about organic chemistry. I love it. If you were to picture the pharmaceutical industry and think about pharmaceuticals, I would like to challenge you for a second, and I'm going to tell you that in a somewhat recent publication, and I could be a little bit delayed on this one, the number might be bigger, but within the last 10 years, I would say that it's really somewhere close to 80% of our pharmaceuticals are actually derived from natural products. So they are either the natural product themselves or they are derived from the natural products. So one of the first questions I get a lot as an organic chemist with a background in pharmaceuticals is, why do we need all these synthetic drugs? Why can't we just tap into nature? People have been doing that for years. Well, we have too. So that's exactly where an awful lot of pharmaceuticals come from. They are derived from products that are natural. So it's actually really cool. Starting in the United States, we have something called the Natural Products Repository. And it's huge. I've given us a couple of links here if this is something you're curious about. If I've got some budding pharmacists in the or some budding synthetic organic chemists or anything like that in the audience. What's really cool is that we have a huge library of actual natural products and compounds that are coming from nature that have various biological activity. And a lot of those libraries are tapped for medicines. So it's really phenomenal. If you've always wondered where medicines are coming from, they're coming from organic chemistry. That's one of the main reasons that I'm so excited that you're taking this class if you're in the healthcare field. So you sometimes think medicines come from MDs and not at all the case. They're coming from a lot of organic chemistry. So it's exciting. So a lot of these compounds are biologically active and they're a really good place to start for drug discovery. So I shared with you 2 links here, not something I'm going to test you on. I just wanted you to have some fun information. I mean, we're in the thousands to tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of compounds that are in this natural products repository. And then I wanted to find something that is also used all over the place, and that is the term synthetic. Now, for us in chemistry, that means that somewhere this is produced in a lab. All right, now this is what's really important if you haven't had some chemistry and you're really listening to the news, because this is goofed up all over the place. If something is produced in the lab, does it make it any different than the actual compound that might be found in nature? No. And this has been known for quite a while. This is also a big theory of Linus Pauling starting back in the 1950s and has held true today. These compounds are exactly the same. And it's really fascinating because let's go back to our original definition. All right, what makes a compound that compound is which atoms are bonded to which atoms and in what shape, not where it came from. I mean, although we'll comment, a lot of things go back and forth and mix and match. So I wanted to actually share a couple stories with you just to give you perspective on some of these definitions between natural and synthetic and why we even need organic chemistry in the middle. If you're thinking, well, wait, Dr. Morty, you're insane. If there's all these compounds in nature that have biological activity, why don't we just use that? I mean, why don't we just take nature, throw it in a pill, and problem solved? So I really want to just take today to kind of go through some fun stories and give us perspective on why we're taking this class. Look, I even wrote in there, why do we care? So why do we give a crap? Let's start with probably the most famous pharmaceutical out there. Let's talk really quickly about this story of aspirin. I like to start with this one, and actually Wikipedia has a pretty good history on aspirin. I like to start with this one because if you took your Gen Chem 2 anywhere here at ACC, and then actually if we were in lab for our organic class, and even in organic 2, we do something with aspirin in almost every one of our chemistry classes. So you've actually made aspirin in your Gen Chem 2 class if you took it here. So that would be synthetic. You actually made synthetic aspirin in the lab. All right, aspirin has a rich history. All right, there are actually two forms that we're going to start with. The first is a natural form of aspirin, and that is salicylic acid. So I'm actually going to draw the structure because we just learned what makes that compound is its structure, which atoms are attached to which atoms, and in what shape. Now, if you were to look at Wikipedia right now, you would find structures drawn like this. So our entire first unit will be to learn how to draw organic structures like this. They're called Kekule structures. We're going to use lines for our covalent bonds. Do you notice there's not a carbon in sight? That's our ends and bends. So one of the first things we're going to learn is how to actually draw like this. And you'll notice when you look up your drugs on Wikipedia, they tend to all be drawn like this. This is standard for organic chemistry. So this is actually salicylic acid, and this is a natural product. This is found in a willow tree. It has been around for close to 2,500 years as a pain reliever. Can you believe that? That is an awful long time to actually have pain relieving properties. It's also been known for a long time to cause a little tummy ache. And I think there's lots of theories. One of those is that it's so acidic. I think it was linked to ulcers for a while, but now they found that ulcers are what? A virus, I think, or bacteria, one or the other. And so the properties of pain relief have been known for a very long time. And you can use the natural product in that way. It also has those known side effects. Starting in 1850s, I think it's 1853 or 1857, our aspirin story really began with a synthetic derivative, which starts with natural aspirin. But because of those side effects, they found that if they could take aspirin and actually block here with vinegar, this is what you did in Gen Chem 2, you literally put an equivalent of vinegar on that molecule, then they could relieve those tummy aches. So this is what we are modern using as aspirin, so that we can get it past your tummy. And then guess what happens when this molecule gets past your tummy and it gets into your guts? This falls off, and you now have this in your system. Isn't that cool? So I love this story because it puts in perspective. Let's talk numbers. Can you actually derive this from nature? Absolutely. It is coming from a willow tree. All right. Can you get to this aspirin from things that are natural? Absolutely. You've got a willow tree and you've got vinegar. You can make this happen. Okay, but here's where it gets tricky. Let's talk numbers. What does your gut tell you if I were to ask you how many people take an aspirin every day across the globe? Would you get to the right amount? I can tell you that starting in the early to mid 2010s. If you look at Wikipedia, you can tell that we are up to billions consumed each year. So close to 120 billion aspirin a year are consumed. So if you look at just a single day, you're looking at, not quite a billion a day aspirin that are actually being consumed. So when you do the math on this, if I wanted to take this from a willow tree and we started to crunch some numbers, it turns out that the salicylic acid is present in the leaves. And if you wanted to harvest that salicylic acid, I don't know the exact numbers, but we could look it up. In fact, I've got another paper for you right down here for CBD that those numbers are published. It is going to take an awful lot of leaves and an awful lot of willow trees just to maybe even produce 1 bottle of aspirin. But yet you have a consumption in the billions every year. So this is where organic chemistry, especially the area of natural products synthesis, comes in. Is this known in nature? Absolutely. Why don't we tap nature for that compound? Depending on where your supply is coming from, maybe your willow tree takes 100 years to mature. If you had to literally have that many willow trees to produce 120 billion pills a year of aspirin, that is a phenomenal number. So this is where organic chemistry comes in, and this is where synthesis comes in. And half of our entire class will be synthesis. Could we still make this medicine available, but actually not devastate, need 1 billion trees a year for salicylic acid? So this is one of my favorite stories because it just gives perspective. All right, aspirin are just consumed a phenomenal amount, and if you had to actually tap nature for that, you would run out pretty quickly. Let me give you another modern story. This one is really fun. I usually have a few students who have maybe been affected by Taxol. I actually saw the talk on Taxol as a grad student in the early 2000s, and I included several links here for you if this is something you're interested in. There's actually a number of pages that give a really good story of Taxol. It's a really good just journey through organic chemistry and pharmaceuticals. So let's just give you the slimmed down version of why we even need to learn about some of these things. So Taxol itself is a natural product. It is a treatment currently for breast cancer. So you may have had family members or people that are have used that or have heard of Taxol. It is a natural product. It comes from a Pacific yew tree. It was actually discovered in the 60s by a Harvard botanist. He was actually out collecting samples, and I'm going to just drastically simplify this, but if you're out in nature and you're collecting samples and then you end up taking that back to the lab and you throw some of those in a petri dish and you see what they do to cells. Do they kill cells? Do they help cells grow? You're just getting some idea of what those compounds do. So as early as the early 60s, Taxol itself was actually known. By the late 60s, it was known to actually have some anti-cancer properties or I don't know that it was specific to breast cancer yet, but it had properties for cancer treatments, right, which is pretty cool. So let's fast forward. Well, wait a second. If we already have this compound that's known all the way back to 1962, how in the world is it not a drug by like 1963? Okay, it turned out that it was actually anti-tumor activity in mice. It took until 1977 to show that it was anti-tumor in mice. Okay, so that's awesome. Now what do you do with it? Well, here's where we get into some of the chemistry, right? How in the world can you now start to figure out if that's going to do anything with people? So it turns out that if you look at the structure of Taxol, and if we were in class, I would Google this for you. I really want you to look at that structure for Taxol. It is a natural product, but it's actually fairly complicated as a structure. It is actually pretty complex. So if you want to get your hands on a clinical trial, which they did, so starting in about the 1980s, they realized that this was kind of specific to breast cancer, and they wanted to use this as a treatment. So in our country, you have to go through FDA trials. So just the first round of FDA trials for Taxol took over 3,000 trees. All right, let's let that sink in. That is only the first trial of FDA trials. I mean, that is an awful lot of trees for one trial for one drug. So then now you turn to organic chemistry. You've got this structure and you've got this compound, and it's a hit. You want to use it for a drug, you're going to have to somehow make it. Well, the first synthesis of Taxol was in the early 90s, and that was out of Florida. And so that's this bottom link here, Florida State University, early 1990s was the first synthesis of Taxol. Okay, let's talk turkey. That thing was 51 steps. All right, 51 steps in the lab to make that compound. I'm not sure what's worse, 3,000 trees or 51 steps. What was awesome about the synthesis is that they proved they could make it, and it was actually a really complicated molecule to make. So that was very important. So now they could get their hands on some of this compound, but there's no way that you could actually mass produce something in 51 steps and have it be even remotely cost effective. And I'm not getting into politics of pharmaceutical companies and making money. I'm just saying, look, for 51 steps, that was going to be a phenomenally expensive drug. So by the mid 1990s to early 2000s, what was the solution? Y'all, this is one of my favorite chemistry stories ever. What was the solution? The talk I saw in the early 2000s was that they actually grew a flower. Isn't that genius? They took a flowering plant that had an intermediate that was a similar compound. All right, and flowering plants, you can grow them fast. You can harvest them and throw them in a blender a whole lot faster than a tree. So they had a similar compound that came from this nice flowering plant that they can grow up much faster. And then the synthesis from that compound to Taxol was only 20 to 21 steps. So this is a beautiful story of nature, synthesis, and organic chemistry all in one. Actual Taxol is a natural product, okay? Actual Taxol from a yew tree, just not possible in order for it to be a treatment. Just straight synthesis of Taxol was far too complicated. So they literally took another natural product and converted that to Taxol. Isn't that amazing? I just love that story. So we're hitting all of our definitions in there. If any of this is interesting to you, these are some really nice links to talk about that story, and they'll give you a whole lot more detail than I just did. And the story is progressing. So mine is from the early to mid 2000s when I saw the talk, so it may even be updated. And then I'm just going to take a couple more minutes for fun, because I want y'all to think I'm modern. So let's talk CBD. I get a million questions on marijuana, pot, CBD all the time. Before the whole COVID thing, you couldn't walk down the street without tripping into a CBD store. So is it good for you? Is it bad for you? All of these questions are far more complex than buying a vitamin at a store. So what you need to consider, first of all, I hope that we've learned from this video, is you have to start with the structure, okay? Which atoms are connected to which? So you've got to find out what's bonded to what. It's almost like you need to match those structures. And then second, you've got to consider shape. So if you look at CBD structure, please pull up this article. It's actually really fun. You should get it for free. It's one of our American Chemical Society articles, so you can actually read it. It's coming from the magazine. And the article has the whole story of CBD as an actual pharmaceutical. And they go to the level of telling you, okay, CBD, first of all, they give you the structure, and then they compare the structure to THC. Okay, that's how you're going to compare. If you want to know if they're the same or they're different, you have to start with their structure. So the paper does a really good job of comparing those two structures. And then they go into numbers. So they go into the actual clinical trial. They give you amounts in milligrams. What would that dosage be to be effective? And then they take it a step further and they tell you where they were taking their studies from those natural products and how much of that hemp plant you would actually need to get to those milligram doses. They put all the numbers in those papers, and it's really, really good. So you can learn about CBD, and yet if you go to your vitamin store, maybe your CBD is 5 milligrams, but if you had a prescription for CBD, maybe it's 600 milligrams, and they are quite different. So I love that article because it takes our story like Taxol and it puts it into a modern, something that's been, quite popular lately, and it goes all the way to telling you amounts and numbers and how to really think about that process. So for fun, if you're curious about any of these things, I think you should check out these links that I've given you. I'm not going to test us on anything on here. This isn't really a history class, but I hope I'm at least giving you perspective on where we're going to start our first unit. And what we're going to do is start with carbon and hydrogen, our most basic organic substances, and we are going to start by bonds. We are going to put atoms together, and then we're going to add shape. So we are going to dive deep into carbon and hydrogen bonding, and then we're going to add shape to that and add this concept of isomers so that we can tell all of these things apart. It's going to be super fun. So we'll actually start that in lecture. So I'm going to stop this video and I'll post this video, and then our actual carbon and hydrogen and alkanes is going to be in another video. I hope this is getting you excited for the summer, and I hope